A very good morning. Today we'll start on the infections which we call as congenital infections. Now, congenital infections, as we know, there are many etiological agents which can cause congenital infections. So, in a nutshell, you can classify them as causes of congenital infections, which can be either bacterial or parasitic or viral agents. Among the bacterial agents, notably, we have the most common cause of congenital infections associated among the bacterial agents is Treponema pallidum, which cause the clinical infection which is known as syphilis. Now, among the parasitic infections, we have Toxoplasma gondii, which causes toxoplasmosis. Now, when we come to the viral agents which cause congenital infections, we have the agents such as rubella, CMV, parvoviruses, and varicella. These are among the most common causes of congenital infections. However, we do have some other viral agents which are also known to cause congenital infections, though somewhat in a very very low incidence. Now, coming to syphilis. Now, syphilis, when we classify syphilis, as you know about the clinical manifestations and the clinical progression of the disease, when we have to classify syphilis, the infection is actually, as you know, when you talk about the transmission, it can be acquired, it can be an acquired infection, or it can be a form of a congenital infection. Now, again, when you talk about acquired syphilis, it has been further subdivided depending on the clinical progression of the disease into early syphilis, late, and tertiary syphilis. And then when you're talking about the congenital infections, now as you know about when you talk about congenital infection is an infection which actually occurs, which is acquired by the neonate when he or she is born, and then the infection would have already predisposed, or which the mother has already had the infection. So these infections are actually transmitted transplacentally or transvaginally when the child passes through the birth canal. So you can classify the type of congenital syphilis here as early or as late. So early means if the manifestations occurs within less than 2 years of age, or late when the infection occurs more than 2 years of age. So this is what I've already mentioned, that congenital syphilis, you can have the infection which results from transplacental infection. And now we also have the infections of HIV, where we have association of the STIs, or what we call as sexually transmitted infections, often associated with HIV. So the rate of congenital syphilis has been found to be 50 times greater among infants born to HIV infected mothers, because when you talk about a person who's HIV infected, the chance of a person having these infections, or the chance of the child acquiring infection if the mother is already infected with syphilis is much more higher. Now, the organism which causes syphilis, as you know, is Treponema pallidum. And the most of the time when you talk about when you talk about the congenital infections pertaining to Treponema pallidum or syphilis per se, most of the time you will see children, they will present you with septicemia. So this is a very common form of a presentation when you talk about congenital syphilis. So the early clinical manifestations in untreated early syphilis in pregnancy usually leads to spontaneous abortion, stillbirths, hydrops, preterm delivery, and death in up to 40% of pregnancies. And so in gynae, I think most of you are if you're attending gynae clinics, we always have something which you call as a bad obstetric history. So bad obstetric history, when you talk about syphilis per se, this is how when the mother comes to the OPD, she will always, when you ask about the history of the pregnancy, whether how many para or how many live births she's had. This is usually the scenario of what we see when you talk about syphilis. Most of the time she will say that I already had abortion, then the next child probably the next para child which is there will be stillbirth, then some of them will be preterm delivery, some of them might be born normally with congenital signs and symptoms. So the infants with congenital syphilis usually will have these kind of clinical signs and symptoms such as hepatomegaly, jaundice, skin rash, nasal discharge, anemia, thrombocytopenia, osteochondritis, or pseudoparalysis. So these are some of the early manifestations of congenital syphilis, but please remember that these are not the pathognomic signs and symptoms of only syphilis, because when you talk hepatomegaly, jaundice, there are many other causes which can cause these kind of infections. That's why you have to correlate you have to take a very good antenatal history of the mother, and to rule out whether the mother has been infected with syphilis at some time during her pregnancy. So these are the common signs and symptoms. Now, along with it, you can also have some late manifestations of congenital syphilis, which can include mental retardation, keratitis, deafness, frontal bossing, Hutchinson's teeth, and Salerno's or Clayton's joint. These are some of the late manifestations which are these are the signs which you can easily associate it with congenital syphilis, not the early manifestations. But if you see someone with Hutchinson's teeth, then definitely you will think of congenital syphilis. Even if you have something like saddle nose or Clayton's joints, then you have to think about syphilis. So this is the signs of syphilis. As you can see in the first picture, you can have Hutchinson's teeth. You can see the teeth; they are not normal teeth, which you commonly see. You can see keratitis, the nasal depression, which you can see here. These are some of the signs and symptoms which you will see as part of the late manifestation of congenital syphilis. So this is a rash which again you can see in case of congenital syphilis. A child will have all these rashes which is there in the palms, even in the sole of the feet of the infant. So for diagnosis of syphilis, we have many modalities for diagnosis. When you talk about microscopy, there are microscopic modalities where you can diagnose using the modalities of dark field or direct fluorescent antibody staining, or you can use the impregnation method. But here, please remember, you are going to diagnose congenital infections in a child. So usually, if you have a child who's born with some of these abnormalities, then you have to look at and you have to take the cord blood to diagnose congenital infections. Culture, there's no modality where culture might be of help, but you can take the help of serological diagnosis, where you have both the standard as well as the specific test for diagnosis of syphilis. Now coming to rubella, this is again one of the most common, initially the most common cause of congenital infections, but with the advent of your universal immunization program, we have MMR, which is basically measles, mumps, and rubella. So this has been incorporated in your immunization schedule, so we do not get cases of rubella. But even then, for historical purposes, you have to know that the rubella is one of the viruses which can cause the infection. So as I've already mentioned, that rubella vaccines are available, where it's already they are incorporated in their immunization schedule in the form of MMR vaccines. So this is an RNA virus, okay, and primarily occurs in children and adolescents. And so, because with the advent of the vaccine, the rate of infection or frequency of infection has declined by 99%. So, as a cause of congenital infection in the present scenario, rubella is not one of the. It's not a very common cause of congenital infection. But if it occurs, it is extremely rare, because as we know that it is a vaccine preventable disease. So we presume that children are vaccinated using adopting the MMR, immunization program, which is advocated by the government of India. So we will not commonly come across cases of rubella infections unless the child has not been vaccinated. So this is how, just to recapitulate what we have already told you, that infection is transmitted by respiratory through the respiratory tract, and the incubation can range between 2 to 3 weeks. So these are the common signs. A person who has rubella usually presents with malaise, headache. But what is very characteristic here is that most of these will have a form of a rash, which is non-pruritic erythematous maculopapular rash. So this is one of the viruses which produce rashes as a clinical presentation. So now when you talk about the congenital infections, now all congenital infections, now we know when you talk about pregnancy, we always divide it into 3 trimesters. We have first, second, and third trimester. So there are some agents which, the chance of the neonate acquiring or the fetus acquiring the infection, or the neonate acquiring the infection, will always depend on when the infection has been acquired. So usually if the child acquired the infection, if the mother has the infection during the first trimester, 1 to 4 weeks of gestation, then the chance that the child will have the infection, or the chance that the child will be infected, is very, very high. So 50% chance that the child who is infected, if the mother has acquired the infection during the first trimester, is very high. So as as the pregnancy progresses, if the mother acquires the infection maybe in the 3 months, then the chance that the neonate will be born with some of the congenital manifestation is lesser. So this is what I was just telling you, that you see, when you talk about the 0 to 12 weeks, the 100% risk of the fetus being congenitally infected, resulting in major congenital abnormalities. And this, most of the time, in 20% of cases, spontaneous abortion can occur. So subsequently, as the pregnancy progresses, and if the mother acquires the infection, later part of the infection, so the chance that the child will have the infection becomes much less. So this is very dangerous, because if by chance the mother becomes infected in the first trimester, then the chance that the infant or the neonate, when he or she is born, will have all these congenital infections is much, much higher. So these are some of the clinical signs and symptoms. The most common cause of, or the most common manifestation of congenital rubella is deafness. This has as much as when you talk about congenital rubella, majority, as much as maybe 70 to 80% of cases will present with deafness. Some will present with congenital infections in the eye. Some will involve the central nervous system, and some will have cardiac manifestations. So the classical trait of rubella syndrome, you will usually be cataract, heart defects, and sensory neural deafness. So these are the traits which often, if you have an infant or neonate presenting to you with these kind of traits, with cataract, heart defects, and sensory neural deafness, you have to think about rubella. So the outcome of, irrespective of whether the child or the neonate lands up with the congenital infections, the outcome is not the same for everyone, because as it has been observed that 1/3 of those patients, of those neonates, in spite of having the congenital infections, in spite of having all those manifestations, will still lead normal, independent lives. 1/3 of them might require some form of help, so they might be staying with parents. But then you might have some patients, 1/3 of the individuals who have these infections will have to be institutionalized. So the outcome of the infections with the congenital rubella infections is not the same for each and everyone. So that is why it is imperative that, if you have a case, antenatal case, that's why we always screen for TORCH. This is the scenario where, you can always give the option to the parent when you find that if the mother is infected with is having IgM positivity to rubella, then you can always say that you can always give the options to parents, because there will be a lot of burden, because we cannot say which child or which mother will deliver a normal child, which child or will not require support. So these options you have to ethically, you have to consider all these options when you come across antenatal mothers. That is why we always test antenatal mothers. It is mandatory that they have to go for screening, so that you can give them the option whether they would like to terminate the pregnancy or continue with the pregnancy, in spite of knowing that a child might land up with the congenital manifestations. So this is what I was telling you, that you have to do antenatal screening. So antenatal screening, there are a lot of tests, there are a lot of issues which you have to make sure that the mother who's during pregnancy has to undergo. And then vaccination, you have to ensure that the mother has been properly vaccinated. And if at all, you have to ensure that the mother is not exposed to cases. If at all there are cases of rubella, then you have to ensure that the mother is not exposed to those kind of infections, because they are somewhat in a immunocompromised status. So they have to ensure that they do not get exposed to those kind of infections. So this is the main diagnosis of main modality of diagnosis in case of acute infection. We usually look for the antibodies. So we can do them either we look for the antibodies by ELISAs or HIA. So commonly now what we actually use, we look for specific IgM antibodies by using ELISAs. So ELISAs are usually the modality where we can diagnose the causes of rubella in a mother, antenatal mother. So here, if the mother is IgM positive, then you will know that the mother is having acute infection. So this is basically what actually happens. When you talk about the modalities, most of the time when you talk about acute infection, we know that IgM, IgG antibodies, where you can get IgM antibodies is usually because of acute infection. So, but if you want to know whether the mother has been exposed to the infection, then you have to go. You can look for IgG. So it depends on what you're using the modalities. Either you want to screen or you want to diagnose. So you have to choose the relevant tests. Now coming to the next important cause of congenital infections, we have cytomegalovirus. This is again a herpes virus. And the infection here again, because this is the hallmark, as we know, of herpes viruses, is that they can remain in latent and gets reactivated depending on the host's immune status. So if a host at some time in his or her life becomes immunocompromised, then the chance that the virus can get reactivated is very, very high. So since we're talking about congenital infections, so when you talk about vertical transmission, that is from the mother to the child, the infection can be acquired at various stages of the pregnancy. So it can be acquired in utero, or it can be acquired during delivery, or it can be acquired during breastfeeding. So the clinical manifestations are again very non-specific. A child who has congenital infections might just present with the malaise, fever, lymphadenopathy, and hepatosplenomegaly. So for congenital infections, usually it can affect 0.3% of all live births, and is one of the most common cause of mental retardation after Down syndrome, and is responsible for more cases of congenital damage than rubella. So you have CMV is much more common. Before rubella, your CMV, you have Down syndrome. Now Down syndrome is actually, is because of the other abnormalities, that is your trisomy 21, I think. So there are certain risk factors of how a child can acquire the infection, whether the infection is a primary infection or a recurrent maternal infection. So most of the time it has been observed that the greatest risk of a child acquiring the infection is associated with primary infection in the first half of pregnancy. So during the course of a pregnancy, if the mother becomes reinfected again with CMV, then the chance that the child will be infected with the CMV is much less. So primary infection in the pregnant woman poses a much higher risk of the child becoming congenitally infected. And the infection, as I've already told you, it can be acquired in utero, or it can be acquired during delivery if a mother goes for spontaneous vaginal delivery, so that is one of the route, or it can be acquired through the breastfeeding. So this is the just to show you that the risk of congenital CMV with primary maternal contact, okay. 1 to 4% of pregnant women can seroconvert, or 40-50% of fetuses will be infected, and 5 to 15% of these fetuses will be symptomatic at birth. It's not that the likelihood that even if the fetus is infected, it's not that all the fetus who are infected will have congenital infections. Only 5 to 15% of these who are infected will actually be symptomatic when they are actually born. So when you look here, there's more chance of morbidity than mortality when you talk about the outcome of primary CMV infections in neonates. They will have a lot of congenital manifestations, but the chance of that child dying because of the infection is much less as compared to the outcome, that is the morbidity. So these are some of the what do you call it, the manifestations more commonly associated with CMV. You can have microcephaly, then you can have mental retardation, periventricular calcification, chororetinitis, sensory deafness, hepatosplenomegaly, and jaundice. So these are some of the very most common causes, most common manifestations of congenital infections. But if you look at this, you will see that there's always an overlap of the congenital manifestations of rubella and CMV. So you cannot clearly say that any child who has who has sensory neural deafness, or who has jaundice, is because of CMV or rubella. So you have to actually expose or take a sample and then diagnose the infection per se. These are rashes which is associated with congenital infections. You can see that this is a unit presenting with severe congenital infections, where you can see the rash presenting in the face and in the abdomen trunks. So for diagnosis of congenital CMV infection, you can do amniocentesis. Here, when you do amniocentesis, which means that the fetus is still in utero, you can take the amniotic fluid and then you can diagnose it by either viral isolation, or you can do serological tests, or you can do PCR. Ultrasound might be helpful if the child has already manifested the signs, where you can have microcephaly, or maybe some congenital heart problems are there. Those are the signs which you can detect in ultrasound. So unfortunately, we do not have a vaccine. As of now, we do not have vaccine for CMV, and the antiviral drugs also which we have do not prevent the fetal injury. Now coming to the next infection which we have is parvovirus. Now this is one of the smallest virus, okay, and the infection is transmitted by respiratory droplet and by blood. Incubation period ranges from 4 to 20 days. So this is a disease which we call as erythema infectiosum, or otherwise known as fifth disease. Now this fifth disease has come out because before the entity of parvovirus came about, there have been a lot of the infections which are known to cause congenital infections, which manifest as rashes. So this was the fifth disease which is known to cause congenital infections presenting as a rash, which can present as rash because before this you can have other rubella, CMV, you have other infectious causes which are known to cause the infections, the rash-like presentation. So the most common cause of the parvovirus, as we know, is transient aplastic anemia. So this is the rashes which we see in case of parvovirus. We have the erythema infectiosum. So this is the rash which is most often associated with the erythema infectiosum or parvovirus infection. So this is how most of the time the infection occurs because of the ability of the virus to cross the placenta and destroy the red cell precursors. So this is the pathophysiology of how parvovirus, congenital parvovirus occurs, because they're able to cross the placental barrier and then destroy the red cell precursors. So the chance is that the child will present you with fetal anemia, with the outcome is that the child will have a congestive heart failure leading to hydrops fetalis. So again here, if you look at the risk of the child acquiring the infection is much more higher if there's a maternal infection during the first part of the first trimester, that is 1 to 12 weeks. If the mother is infected, acquires the parvovirus infection, then the chance that the child will acquire the infection is much more higher as compared to if the mother acquires infection in the second and the third trimester. So ultrasound is a very good modality where you can diagnose the causes of congenital infections, because you can actually assess the hydrops fetalis. If the child is having any cardiac abnormalities, you can easily detect on the ultrasound. If the infant survives the hydropic state, then the long-term prognosis is usually favorable. So this is one of the modalities where you can actually intervene, where you can prevent the hydrops fetalis from developing by administration of digoxin to the fetus, that is intrauterine in transfusion. Varicella again is the most common cause. Varicella, as we know, is the agent which causes chickenpox. Okay, and so these are some of the clinical manifestation of chickenpox. A person who has chickenpox will present with macule. First is rash, which will be in the form of macule, papule, vesicle, and pustules. And usually the lesions appears in crops. So this, as we know, that you can easily differentiate between the manifestations of chickenpox and smallpox. So as we know, this is one of the most common infections which is usually prevalent in childhood. So predominantly what we have observed is that 90% of pregnant women are already immune because they have already acquired infection during their childhood. So therefore primary infection is very rare during pregnancy. However, if it occurs at all, if the mother is not immune or has acquired the infection as a primary infection during a pregnancy, then this carries a greater risk of severe disease, particularly when the child is born, they will most often present with pneumonia. So these are some of the signs and symptoms which can occur, which you can see, which you can observe if the child is born. If the mother acquires infection in the first 20 weeks of pregnancy, you can have scarring of rash of skin, hypoplasia, CNS and eye defects, and sometimes the child will not be able to survive, so they will probably die during in infancy. So what we actually observe is that if a child is born, and then we look if there's skin lesions or any visceral infection, or if a child is having pneumonia where they're not able to thrive. So these are some of the signs and symptoms which you have to consider whether the mother has actually been infected with the viruses. So vaccination, this is available, which can be given to susceptible children and adults. Then we can have varicella zoster immune globulins, which can be used as a modality of treatment if you have primary infection in a non-immunized individual. Toxoplasmosis, this is again one of the most common cause of infection. This is a parasite which can cause the infection, and the infection can be acquired through various stages. As we know that the stages of tachyzoids, you have the bradyzoids, you can have the tissue cysts, you can have the tachyzoids. All of these are infectious to the individual. So if a mother is having active infection during the first trimester, then the chance of the child acquiring infection again becomes very, very high, because the tachyzoids which are present in the mother can easily cross the placental barrier and cause infection in the fetus. So the frequency of infection here, as unlike in the previous slide with the other infections, you can see here, if the infection is acquired in the first trimester, the chance of the fetus developing the congenital toxoplasmosis is 50%. But as the disease, if the infection is acquired in the second trimester, the chance that the fetus will acquire the infection goes up to 30%. And then the chance of the neonate getting the infection during the third trimester goes up to 65%. So here, when you talk about congenital toxoplasmosis, you can have both asymptomatic. This is very common with viral infections. Most of the time when you talk about viral infections, as I've already mentioned, that 80 to 90% of time, 80 to 95% of cases, they will usually present asymptomatic. They will be asymptomatic, which means here, when you talk about congenital toxoplasmosis, you can see that 90% of the neonates will be asymptomatic. 80 to 90% will develop some form of infection, and only 10% will develop some form of manifestation in the form of hearing loss or learning disabilities, which means only 10% will learn with mental retardation. Again, here you can have asymptomatic and symptomatic. Most likely, if mother is infected in the second trimester, so the most severe outcome to the fetus is that either the fetus will be a stillborn or abortion will occur. So most of the time when we talk about congenital toxoplasmosis, the child, when he or she is born, usually will have the associated signs like symptoms of very severe infection, that in the form of keratitis, or they will have hepatosplenomegaly, jaundice, and pneumonia. So at all, if some of these fetus or some of these neonates survive the stage, then they will land up with mental retardation or sometimes cerebral palsy, seizures, and some other problems in their adolescence and subsequently to their adulthood. So for diagnosis, we can do PCR. We can easily diagnose toxoplasmosis. Then serology, if the mother is, as part of the antenatal checkup, because we have the TORCH panel, which is, as you know, TORCH stands for toxoplasmosis. So we always check as part of the routine, the routine panel where we check for antenatal mothers. So we screen for toxoplasmosis also. Then ultrasound might be helpful when you have to look at the progression of the fetus, how the fetus is growing, with any other manifestations which are there, which might suggest that it could become a form of congenital toxoplasmosis. So as we know that, I'll not go to the life cycle, but we know how the infection is transmitted. So what we do advise is that, during pregnancy, we would advise that the mother should not handle cats, because we know that this infection is transmitted because of through cats, and then cats waste. So then one modality is where it can be transmitted through inadequately cooked meat. So we have to ensure that these are precautions. We have to ensure that the antenatal mother has to take into consideration. So in conclusion, we have congenital rubella. This can be prevented because of universal vaccination. Okay. So congenital CMV, because we do not have a vaccine, so you have to actually ensure that the mother is not exposed during pregnancy. Then congenital parvovirus. So again, the chances that if you know that there are cases of some people having rashes, then mother should avoid mixing with those people. Varicella, risk to fetus is minimal, but risk to mother is very high. And congenital toxoplasmosis, because the life cycle of the infection is there. So you should ensure that advise the mother if they're having a lot of pet cats, at least you should avoid handling those cats during the pregnancy. So that is all. Okay, thank you.